You know, when you hear the name Valley Forge, your mind probably jumps straight to images of incredible suffering. And look, you're not wrong, but that's only half the story. That brutal winter of 1777, it wasn't just about survival. It was the very crucible that forged a ragtag group of rebels into a real professional army.
Just let that sink in for a second, leaving trails of bloody footprints in the snow. That single, chilling image says it all, doesn't it? It captures the absolute rock-bottom desperation of the Continental Army. So how on earth did they get to this point?
All right, so picture this. It's December 1777. George Washington's army is just beaten. They're exhausted, they're demoralized, and they've been losing. They shuffle into a place called Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, not for another battle, but to hunker down for a planned 6-month winter encampment. It was a move they absolutely had to make.
Now, the choice of Valley Forge might seem random, but it was anything but. It was a really smart, calculated military decision. Think of it as a strategic sweet spot. It was close enough to British-occupied Philadelphia that they could keep an eye on things, but it was also far enough away and on high ground to prevent a surprise attack. It was the perfect place to retreat, regroup, and hopefully rebuild.
But just surviving was the first battle. Imagine this. You arrive, freezing, and the first thing you have to do is build your own shelter. Thousands of log huts from scratch. And the supply situation, it was an absolute catastrophe. We're talking almost no food, no warm clothing or blankets, and for thousands of soldiers, not even any shoes.
So, while the threat of the British Army was always looming, the greatest enemy the soldiers faced that winter, well, it wasn't wearing a red coat. It was an invisible killer, and it was thriving right there inside the camp.
And these numbers, they tell a really grim story. A whopping 75% of the deaths were not from combat, but from disease. Things like dysentery, typhus, pneumonia, all spreading like wildfire because of the poor sanitation and the soldiers being weakened by malnutrition. The conditions themselves were a much more effective enemy than the British Army. 2,500. That's the estimated number of soldiers who died that single winter. To put that in perspective, about 1 in every 4 men who marched into Valley Forge never marched out. And they weren't lost in some glorious battle. They were lost to sickness and starvation.
And behind that huge number are thousands of individual stories of pure misery. A surgeon at the camp, Dr. Albigens Waldo, he wrote this in his diary. "I am sick, discontented, and out of humor. Poor food, hard lodging, cold weather." You can just feel the daily grinding despair in his words.
Honestly, with the Continental Congress failing to get them supplies and morale at an all-time low, the army could have just dissolved. So what held it all together? It really came down to the unwavering leadership of George Washington. His sheer presence and refusal to give up was the glue holding this fragile cause together. But this is where the story takes a turn. This absolute low point, this moment of utter despair, also became the turning point. Out of all that mud and misery, a couple of key things happened that started to forge a completely new kind of army.
First, enter this guy, Baron von Steuben. He was a seasoned Prussian military officer who shows up at Valley Forge and is frankly appalled by what he sees. It wasn't a lack of bravery, not at all. It was a complete and total lack of professional military discipline, and he was about to change all of that.
And the transformation he brought about, it was like night and day. Before he got there, the army was basically a collection of different state militias. They were brave, for sure, but they were all doing things their own way, which was super inefficient. After his training, they started to move and fight like a single, unified American army.
So how did he do it? No magic tricks. It was just relentless, practical, hands-on drilling. He created one standard way for everyone to do everything, from how to load a musket quickly to how to properly use a bayonet, which had been a huge weakness for them. Most importantly, he taught them how to maneuver together, turning chaos into battlefield order.
So while von Steuben was reshaping the army from the inside, something absolutely monumental was happening on the world stage. Because look, discipline is one thing, but to win a war against a global empire like Britain, you need a powerful friend. And that friend was about to be France.
In the spring of '78, news of the Treaty of Alliance with France finally reached the camp, and it was an absolute game-changer. France wasn't just cheering from the sidelines anymore. They were officially recognizing the United States and committing their military, their powerful navy, and a ton of money to the cause. This was the moment real hope was reborn.
So as the snows finally started to melt, the whole vibe at Valley Forge changed. It was no longer a place of despair. It had become a training ground, and it was just buzzing with this new energy and a real sense of purpose.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It tells the whole story. In December, the army stumbles in on the verge of collapse. In February, von Steuben arrives and starts his intense training. In May, the incredible news of the French alliance electrifies the camp, and by June, a completely different army is ready to march out.
So the army that left Valley Forge was, yes, smaller than the one that came in, but it was infinitely stronger. It was now a hardened, professional fighting force, trained in modern tactics, and filled with a real, credible hope that victory was actually possible. The winter hadn't broken them. It had forged them.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Was all that profound suffering a necessary evil? Was the crucible of Valley Forge, with all of its death and all of its despair, the very thing the American cause needed to ultimately triumph? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?